Welcome to Tips, the Townsend Institute podcast series, a show produced by the Townsend Institute at Concordia University Irvine. This podcast shares stories of leadership, coaching, and counseling experiences that have shaped the lives and careers of our guests, who then provide tips aimed toward helping listeners grow in both their personal and professional lives. I'm Dr. John Townsend, psychologist, organizational consultant, and author of over 30 books, including the New York Times best-selling Boundaries series. I'm also the founder of the Townsend Institute, and I'm excited to introduce your podcast hosts, Dr. Ashlie Andrew and Dr. Gilbert Puget.
Welcome back to another episode of the Townsend Institute podcast series, where we sit down with Jonathan Reitz, Master Certified Coach with the International Coaching Federation. After years in broadcast journalism, Jonathan found his way into the coaching arena nearly 30 years ago.
That's right, Gilbert. Jonathan's background includes work with large corporations, international organizations, faith-based nonprofits, and more recently, the expansion of team coaching practice and certification. In this episode, he provides great insights about how he views coaching as a vocation, in which the Jesus that lives in one of us can reach out to the Jesus that lives in another. Not to mention, a little humor can go a long way. Let's get started. All right. Welcome, Jonathan, to the podcast. We're so glad you're here.
Well, thanks for having me. Definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, we're going to jump right into it. We want to know, you spent a little bit of time there in the world of television, but how did you kind of end up now in the coaching realm?
Well, it's funny that the television definitely led to coaching for me, with no question about it. And it was actually almost 20 years I was in radio and television doing all kinds of different things, typically centering on morning broadcasting. I did a lot of morning radio. I was one of those wacky morning disc jockeys for a while. I did a lot of morning television news. I wanted to work at the Today Show. That was really what I was aiming for, is, someday Matt Lauer is going to retire and I can take over that particular job. Well, the thing I wasn't factoring in was that everybody knew Matt Lauer was destined for not good things, except me. And the other thing about that is I mostly worked at NBC stations. And if you've ever been to New York City at Rockefeller Center where they shoot the Today Show, it is a traditional old school New York facility, where there's a lot of office space crammed into a very small area, including the studio. Well, what you can't tell on the podcast here is that I'm 6'6". Typically in a New York City studio, you don't hire an enormous anchor.
I did not know that was a thing.
That's changed a little bit now, but 20 years ago when I was getting out of it, because 9/11 is actually the thing that made me go, I don't think I want to be in this business. The news business changed very dramatically after 9/11. And I started thinking to myself, I'm not sure I want to really make this my career. The common theme in all of this, which does get me to the coaching connection.
I'm curious though, Jonathan, before you go.
Okay.
What was your radio handle? Did you have some phrase or?
No, I didn't. Well, the closest thing I had, now I never used my real last name. In my first radio job, I had a situation. Now I'm going to date myself here. I'm going to show you how old I am. When I first got into radio, there was this thing called a phone book where they would print the names of everybody in a particular town and their phone numbers, and their addresses were in there. And I was listed in the phone book on my real name. And I used my real name. And I had a moment where someone picked my name out of the phone book and decided to start showing up at my house.
Oh.
And I decided after that first job, that was at my very first radio job, which was I got lucky. I started with a small role on a morning radio show in a big town, which is not typically how it happens. Mm-hmm. And I got lucky. And, this person picked out my name out of the phone book and started showing up at my house. So I started using a different last name. And it changed a lot. I was always Jonathan, or almost always Jonathan, but my last name changed a lot. And the only handle I had was I was using the last name Dillon, so I was Jonathan Dillon. And the show that I hosted with two other guys, we used to call it The Big Show. And I used to say in the, when we would come out of a commercial song with him, that's Hootie and the Blowfish here on Power 98.9, JD on the BS. So I would say Jonathan Dillon on The Big Show, abbreviated down to JD on the BS. I used to say that all the time. That's the one hook, and I'm sure that's going to be edited out of this particular podcast.
No way. No, that's gold right now, Jonathan.
We've got JD on the TP.
Oh,
yeah, that's right.
Podcast.
That's right. I appreciate it. Well done, Ashlie. Well played.
So you hung up the microphone and, the 6'6" frame for morning news goals, and instead you moved into coaching. And so how long have you been in this kind of coaching realm?
So I can tell you that almost to the minute, believe it or not, because on April 25th, 1997, I got invited to a 3-day offsite meeting of a bunch of people in the chain of TV stations where I was working. And they flew us to a different town. They took us to a downtown hotel on that particular town. And halfway through the first session on the first morning of that thing, they brought in this guy to work with us to help us coalesce into a team that could come up with local programming ideas. 20 minutes into it, I leaned over to Mary Margaret Downey and I said, I don't know what that guy's doing, but whatever that is, that's what I'm going to do after television. And I went up to him at the break. I learned that his name was Steve Martin, not that Steve Martin. And I said, hey, what are you doing here? What is this? He said, well, I am an executive leadership and team coach. And I went, I've never seen anything like this before, Steve. How do I learn to do this? And he thought for a second. He said, how about I help you? And I literally talked to him 2 to 3 to 4 times a week, every week for the next 5 years as he was teaching me this process. And I started doing that internally for TV stations and got into that situation, which was really kind of fascinating because the TV business does not really encourage, at least in those days, it probably is much better now, but it doesn't really encourage healthy self-images, healthy understanding of what you're gifted to do and those kinds of things. And having grounded, thoughtful people to come alongside leaders in that industry really can make a difference. And I started watching him doing that in a bunch of different businesses, a bunch of different situations. And I went, this is really appealing. I have no idea how to make a living doing this, but this is really interesting. This is really appealing. And like I say, I coached a lot of people inside that chain of TV stations. When I left that after 9/11, after that business after 9/11, I worked for an ad agency that provided coaching in leadership and vision and creative thinking. I did that for this ad agency for a while. Then I worked for I was the director of coaching for a denomination. I spent 5 years doing that. And in the course of that period of time, I met a guy named Bob Logan who had started a company called CoachNet, which was intended exclusively and totally to raise up coaches to put alongside church planters. And Bob asked me to help with that. And then a year or so later, he said, I don't really want to do this. Why don't you take this over? I ended up buying the name CoachNet and some of the experience from some of the strategy from CoachNet. And that has grown into now Fluxify, which is the company that I oversee. That's the 5-minute version of the last 27 years.
I appreciate that, Jonathan. And you've actually helped train coaches out here in the Pacific Southwest District for Lutheran Church too. I mean, I went through that training and a lot of folks. So it's great how connected you are to LCMS and things.
I live 2/3 in the corporate world, 1/3 in the not-for-profit and faith-based world. And that has been it's one of the things I appreciate about the coaching world in general, which is that you can really frame what you want to do in coaching based on who you want to coach. And my thing is I'm looking for leaders who have a vision And the vision, it has to be the kind of vision to, to make the world a better place, or to positively change people's circumstances. I can't imagine I would coach a leader who is solely and completely driven by making money. I can't imagine I'd do that. That's not how I think of myself. But this leader that has a vision to make the world a better place and actually has some people following them, that's typically who I end up coaching. The other interesting wrinkle to the people I end up coaching is they typically are starting something new. So that kind of combination points at some people in the corporate world, some people in the educational world, some people in the faith-based world, some people in the not-for-profit world. The common theme really is those kinds of qualities. And sometimes it shows up as a Fortune 100 company CEO. Sometimes it shows up as the guy who runs the record store on the town square in the suburb of Cleveland where I live. Sometimes it's a community development organization. Sometimes it's a university president. Just as I think that television took me places that nothing else could take me, I look back at the doors coaching has opened, and I just think, if I'd have worked for 5 years planning this, I could not have planned what has actually happened as a result of getting involved in coaching. So I think back on that morning, once again, April 25th, 1997, and I think I'm pretty glad I went to work that day, because everything changed.
That's very true. And so it sounds like, did you get involved with team coaching right away? Because now ICF is doing the accreditation and everything. You're on the forefront of that. Or did you kind of start off in individual coaching? What was your motivation there?
I started off primarily, in working in news departments of TV stations.
Okay.
I started primarily working with the leaders of teams. And then very quickly, those guys started saying to me, "Can't we meet as a team with you?" And quite honestly, Gilbert, I probably shouldn't admit this out loud, but I'm going to. I didn't vary my approach much. Okay, for like the first 10 years of doing that. What I would do with an individual was exactly what I would do with a team. And then I got some feedback from somebody that said, "I don't think you're taking seriously enough when you work with our team, that we need to talk to each other as much as we need to talk to you."
Uh-huh.
And I went, "Oh, I bet that's right. Please don't take this as me being humble. This is me being clueless." I really had no idea that I was shortchanging that part of the process.
Yeah.
But I look back on it and go, you know what? That was really helpful feedback. That's another one of those moments where a single moment made me go, you know what? I need to do some things differently. And the downside is I can't tell you what the date was when that conversation happened, like I can with the other one. But the truth of it is that got me thinking about, you know what? There are some pretty significant differences between how I optimally work with an individual as opposed to how I optimally work with a team. And I need to be more intentional about that.
Well, let's dig a little deeper into that, if you don't mind, Jonathan. A lot of our listeners here are probably those that are already coaches, or maybe they're pursuing a career and future in coaching. So what might one of those biggest differences be? So you have an individual coaching client. How might you address that relationship versus perhaps a team coaching environment?
I'll give you the two that I find make the most difference. Number one, when I go into an individual coaching conversation and I ask what I think is a great question, the real standard that identifies whether or not it's a great question is not that I walk away understanding the client's situation more clearly, but that they do. Now, the difference between that and an individual session and a team coaching session, this is the only thing in team coaching I wish I'd have figured out sooner. It's not that I need to ask questions so that the team ends up with a different understanding, but it's more so that I ask questions so that the team has a better connection to each other. So the interpersonal dynamics, first and foremost, must improve as a result of a coach, in this case me, being engaged with a particular team. My number one job when I walk in to a team coaching environment, I think, is to improve the working alliances across the team. If I'm successful in that, whatever problem the team came to a coach for, we'll likely make some progress on it. The second one, and this is hard for I'm a German Lutheran. Heck, my last name is Reitz, for goodness sake. My father was a physicist. All of my family are things like lawyers and investment bankers and things like that. I have had to learn to hold the outcomes that team coaching generates very, very loosely, because what a team thinks it's going to look like when they're finished and what it is actually likely to look like, probably not the same. The route they're going to take to get there, only kind of predictable. And the team coach has to show up and invite the team on the ride, knowing that it's probably not going to be exactly like you think it's going to be when you get to the destination. That has been a bit of a struggle for me, quite honestly. Well, let me say this. Let me say it more accurately. That is the kind of challenge that does not come naturally to me. So I have to put specific attention into letting things progress the way they should.
Jonathan, I'm glad you shared that, because I really identify with that. I'm doing some team coaching supervision with your friend Eva, I think.
Okay.
I brought my case example the other day, and they kind of said, "Hey, you're kind of holding more than you should for the team." I said, "Oh yeah," because I got used to so long in my role being the team leader. Well,
Right.
now I got to put myself in the team coach, and that was a good realization when I started talking about it. They said, "No, that's not your role in this process."
On the ICF website, there's an interesting panel conversation about the boundaries between team coaching and facilitation. Well worth looking into.
Okay.
Now, I won't diverge us into that right now, but I think the actual examination of, hey, am I coaching this team or am I facilitating this team, is a really powerful thought exercise for anybody who comes alongside groups of people and wants to help catalyze them to a new reality.
Absolutely, yeah. And so you've worked with a lot of teams over the years here. Can you think of a team or two that have made significant changes throughout the process?
The thing that I love about this question is change is such a big, broad reality. I can think of a team that actually got where they wanted to go by turning over the team members, by realizing they had the wrong people involved in the project. And the big lesson for me as a team coach there is that I look really hard at the makeup of teams early on in an engagement. And I want to see clear roles across the team. Now, I don't have roles that I walk in saying every team needs a researcher, every team needs a, comedic relief, every team needs a visionary. It's not that structured for me. But I do think there's something to be said for understanding that team members need to be doing different and interrelated things across the team. And sometimes you build that by turning over people in the makeup of the team. Now, another team I can think of, this happened at the beginning of December last year, so this one's a little bit fresh. This team privately said to me after the first session, a couple of team members came up to me after the first session, said, Jonathan, I don't know if you know this or not, but we don't really care for each other. We're on this team. We all work here. This company pays really well, so we're all staying, but we don't really like each other. I went, okay, interesting. How's that going to affect the working relationship? And the person that was saying this to me said, well, I'm going to be really surprised if we accomplish anything that we're setting out to accomplish. And I went, oh, okay. So fast forward to the next conversation. This particular team I met with weekly from the beginning of December to about the beginning of March. Mm-hmm. One of the things I do with a team is I begin every session with, why are we here? Because I want to hear them revisit the purpose of the team. Not necessarily why this meeting is happening, but what's the purpose of the team? I want to hear them say it. And I want to watch them get to alignment.
Yeah.
About that. So I started those sessions with that, and I noticed early on in the December sessions that they could barely respond to each other. They were not digging it. Something happened after the first of the year where all of a sudden they had a comedic edge. Something funny had happened between the team members, and well, they started teasing each other, really, is what it came down to. And to be honest with you, it was a little mean-spirited. And that's what I chose to call out. I was like, it sounds like this was really a funny experience that happened here. You brought it up 3 weeks in a row, the same thing. But is it just me, or are you all a little bit nasty to each other? So we were 6 or 7 sessions into it, and now it was on the table. And it was like the dam broke. Now, we didn't do any work that particular day on the purpose of the engagement. We just cleared the air. And it was like a completely different experience from that point on. And I'd love to tell you it was because I was brilliant and insightful, and I knew that, hey, just name it. I would love to tell you it's not true. I was uncomfortable with how much of an edge there was in the humor. And that was how I presented it. I said, look, I hate to say this, but I am just uncomfortable. I don't care for this. What's going on? What's the story there? I was hoping that by saying it would take the edge away. It did 1,000 times more than I was hoping. And all of a sudden they would laugh, but they were laughing together, not at each other. And it completely changed the process. Now, the last thing I'll say along those lines is I use a lot more humor in my team coaching than I do in my one-on-one coaching, because I find that humor is a great way to align team members together.
Mm-hmm.
And I find in one-on-one coaching, I'll just say it this way. I'll say what my wife says to me. I'm a lot. One-on-one, I don't find that my humor is as helpful as it can be in a team environment. So don't get me wrong, I'm not serious. I'm not like deadly serious, but I don't channel my inner Jerry Seinfeld. That's probably an audience appropriate reference. Jerry Seinfeld was an American comedian. He's in about his 60s now. He had a television show that was on 20 years or so ago, but that's probably an appropriate reference. I don't let that come out in one-on-one coaching real often, just because I've learned the hard way that it's not that helpful. So that was a long answer to your question about a team that maybe has made some progress, but hopefully that helps.
Absolutely. Well, we want to stick on this topic of team coaching a little bit more because it is such an interesting piece, and it's a fairly new piece to the International Coaching Federation, ICF. We, of course, here at Concordia and our Townsend Institute, our executive coaching program is ICF accredited, but we'd like to know a little bit more about why ICF decided to include a team coaching certification, and perhaps maybe the importance or the growth of that part of coaching over the years.
Okay, shameless self-promotion. I was on the team that helped design the ICF team coaching competencies.
A little birdie told us that, right?
Yeah, I was one of those coaches that the ICF came to and said, hey, we have been thinking that there are notable differences between team coaching and individual coaching. Would you help us study that? And that eventually turned into the ICF team coaching competencies. Now, 3 things I'll mention about this that precipitated that. Number one, I told you that I began to realize that I needed to function differently with a team than I did with an individual. I was not the only coach having that set of realizations. And that kind of thing began to show up in the ICF's global coaching study. Every other year, the ICF hires an outside firm to conduct a large-scale global study of what is currently going on in the coaching industry. Team coaching becoming an evolving skill set began to show up in that study. I think it was about 2013. I think. Don't hold me to that. It was early in the teens. I know that. So the conclusion I would draw from that is that the ICF acknowledged that there's a lot of coaches like Jonathan that were having a whole bunch of realizations that team coaching and individual coaching are a little bit different. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think they discovered in the course of the global coaching study that there was a business opportunity for coaches to add an accredited credential to their practice in an area. Now, I also know, now, full disclosure, I'm not an ICF spokesperson. I'm an active volunteer. I've been a chapter president. I don't work for the ICF, so test everything is what I'm saying here. You know, as the scripture says, test everything.
Yes.
But I do know for a fact that ICF staff have said to me, you know, we began to see an opportunity for supporting coaches who want to build their practice in team coaching and replicate some of the effects of having a credential that we've seen in individual coaching, because there's lots of studies, including the ICF Global Coaching Study, but many other outside third-party studies that document that coaches that have credentials are able to charge better rates for their coaching than coaches who don't have credentials. I am living proof of that. So I think there was some motivation from the ICF folks to say, let's see if we can do the same thing for team coaching that we've done for individual coaching and help coaches run better businesses. Love that. That's a great way to think. And then this is Jonathan's conspiracy theory, and this and $7 will get you a cup of coffee. But I think that the team coaching competency credential, the team coaching credential was a trial balloon for other specialty credentials someday. Now, I don't have any idea what those would be, but I think there was a bit of a test going on saying, hey, I wonder if the coaching world is ready for this, for this kind of thing. And the early indications are that, yeah, there was some really positive, upbeat energy to all of that could be pretty helpful. So standardization of team coaching practice first, business opportunity second, trial balloon for other bigger opportunities.
What do you think are some good resources where we can find out more information about, you know, what you're doing, what others are doing for team coaching? What would you go to? What would you recommend to our listeners?
Okay, three things. Number one, I would go to LinkedIn and I would put in hashtag team coaching into the search box. Okay. And I would then objectively evaluate what you're seeing in those boxes and follow or connect with the voices that you hear that you relate to. Because there is a kind of fascinating conversation around team coaching going on right now on LinkedIn. And without naming names, I'm gonna dance on the tightrope here for a second. Without naming names, there's some of it that I think is spectacular and awesome, and I wish more people were involved in. There's also some stuff that I think is a whole load of hooey. But that's sort of what social media is, right? It's designed to continue the conversation. So follow the ones you like, comment on their posts, engage in the conversation. You will be blown away by what you learn. Secondly, I would look up and become attuned to Jonathan Passmore. I'm going to give you three names. Jonathan Passmore, who is a professor at the Henley Business School in the UK. Richard Boyatzis, who is a professor at Case Western Reserve, at the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. Full disclosure, I'm also affiliated there. And then thirdly, I would dive into the archives of what at the University of Sydney, Anthony Grant did in team coaching. Now, the reason I mentioned those three schools particularly, Henley Business School, Case Western Reserve, University of Sydney, is because those schools have coaching research centers attached to them. Any coach who wants to stay on the cutting edge of what's happening in team coaching in particular, coaching in general, following the Coaching Research Lab, following the Henley Research Lab, following this the Sydney, I think it's called the Sydney Discovery Lab.
Okay.
Those are channels that people should be involved in. And then the last one I'll throw out to you is please join the ICF and please support the communities of practice. And there is a fabulous team coaching community of practice that is active, is ongoing. It's a moderated forum, so it doesn't go off the rails very often. That's a resource that every team coach who wants to raise up their skills should definitely be on top of. The best way to do that is now you got to be a member of the ICF. You have to be an ICF member. And of course, there is a difference between being a member of a local chapter and being a member of the global ICF. You got to be an ICF global member.
Okay.
And then on your profile page, there is a place to access your what do they call it? Your learning center. And all the communities of practice are listed there. There's executive coaching, there's team coaching, there's technology in coaching, there's the science of coaching, there's business of coaching. There's 6 or 7 of them. And they're really, really thoughtful. In my opinion, the team coaching one is the consistently most substantive opportunity. So I'm a big fan of those communities of practice. In fact, that's where that full disclosure, that webinar about team coaching versus facilitation, that's from the team coaching community of practice.
Got it.
I should also full disclose, I'm on the panel that's on that conversation, but I'm not the one who said all the interesting things. My colleagues, I just did a lot of smiling and nodding in that particular panel.
That's the news anchor coming back out in you, right? The
Well,
smiling.
yeah, and it's not especially helpful in an audio only podcast. I mean, yeah, I'm really good at smiling and nodding, and you know, you as we were doing the pre-conversation before this event, you two were saying all these great things, and I'm like smiling. I'm like, well, that's not going to work in the podcast, but in a panel discussion in a webinar, it's really helpful. So you just got to know your medium.
You absolutely do. Well, we appreciate those resources, Jonathan. We're a big fan of you too as well. And one of the other things I think we'd be remiss not to talk is we, of course, here at Concordia are a faith-based institution, and you have been very, vocal and stay true to your faith. So we want to ask you a question about that before we leave too, is how do you lean on and incorporate your faith in some of your coaching practices? And how does that remain a pillar of your work?
That's a great question, and I'm gonna answer it 2 ways. One, this is actually okay. I grew up Lutheran. Can we go all Lutheran on this conversation just for a moment?
We can with Gilbert and I, absolutely.
All right,
Me too.
So I grew up Lutheran. I went to St. John Lutheran School in South Euclid, Ohio. I'm a graduate of Lutheran East High School on the east side of Cleveland. By the way, 2-time defending state basketball champions. Not that I'm biased or anything like that. My grandfather was a Lutheran pastor. My father worked for the Ohio district. I come by the Lutheran thing honestly. We love us some Ephesians 2:8 and 9. We're saved by grace through faith, not by works, lest any man should boast. We really like that part, the whole about lest any man should boast, right? But you know what comes next? And I kid you not, I was 35 years old before I knew what Ephesians 2:10 said. After that background of growing up in the Lutheran environment, I didn't know what it said. It talks about, hey, you are picked out to accomplish the specific works that Jesus himself picked out for you to accomplish. That's where Ephesians 2:10 goes. Talks about how we're saved by grace through faith, how it's not our works. But then the very next line is, but you know what? What you do with that is really important as well. And I fully believe that investing in people through the strategy of coaching is one of those things that Jesus had. I'm almost tearing up saying this to you, that one of those things that Jesus picked out for me to accomplish. I realized over the last 10 or 15 years that it's a 2-pronged thing. One is actually coaching, individuals or teams, conducting those conversations in such a way that they come to realizations about who they are and how Jesus put them together. I keep a light bulb on my desk that I hold up in those moments where something clicks. And those feel like incredible, profound, and divine moments. That is a part of that. Now, the second part of that whole thing that Jesus picked out for me to accomplish is investing coaching skills in people around me. That's how Gilbert and I know each other.
Mhm.
Or as our mutual friend Carl from Belgium calls him, how Gilbert and I know each other.
Which I've never felt so like high class. Like that just really, yeah.
Oh, now that's going to stick.
Gilbert.
That's your handle, Gilbert.
Well, Gilbert, I appreciate that. I'm sure Carl will be thrilled to know that he contributed that to your reality. So that's definitely part of it. I feel like this kind of interaction with people, calling the best out of people, is a part of me living faithfully into the Ephesians 2:10 part of what Jesus picked out for me. But there is one other thing. There's one other option. And the guy I consider my pastor is a pastor in Southern California, not too far from Irvine, actually. A guy named Pastor Mike Perkinson. He talks about, and this is one of the things that as he and I are in discipleship conversations, which we have been for many, many years, he talks about how the Jesus in him jumps at the sight of the Jesus in me. And if we really do believe, like what the New Testament says, that Jesus lives in us because we're saved by grace through faith, not by works, lest we should boast, that there's going to be those moments where the Jesus in us jumps at the sight of the Jesus in the other person. And you know what? Those moments happen for me most consistently and most reliably in coaching situations. So I want that. I want to see Jesus in the world. If the moment when our faithful future in heaven becomes a reality in our minds, we're the only thing about this, we'd be taking heaven right then.
Right.
But we're called to bring the kingdom of heaven to here on earth, and being attuned to the things that Jesus picked out for each of us to accomplish. And paying attention to those moments when the Jesus in us jumps at the sight of the Jesus in others. That's how we make this happen. And for me, coaching is a profound, powerful, even in some cases, mind-bending way to have that become a reality. And I've been very, very fortunate to get to do that in a lot of different situations, including in the Pacific Southwest District. The Reverend Dominic Rivkin is a dear friend of mine, has been a longtime coaching client of mine. And he is a prime example of leading that way. What you all do at the Townsend Institute is a great example of leading that way. Yeah. That's the thing you've been picked out for you to do. And you're attuned to those moments when Jesus says, hey, look, there's some of me in that person. And we get to do what we can do to develop that, to set that free, to bring that little bit of heaven to reality here on earth.
One thing we do as we end each of our episodes is we ask for a takeaway tip. What's a tip that you want our listeners to walk away from this conversation today?
I hope you will walk away thinking, well, two things. First of all, you never know what you seeking out the Jesus in someone else can set free in that particular person. Mm-hmm. There's a beautiful and unpredictable nature to Jesus revealing himself in people that I think coaching also has. So I want to challenge you to ask the best questions you can think of all the time by default, because you never know what that might unleash. And then secondly, I'd throw out to you that people investing in people is like what coaching does, is how the kingdom of heaven comes to earth. And if it's true, if we really believe that where two or more are gathered in my name, there also am I, maybe it's the coach that guarantees that Jesus is present in some of those conversations.
Is intentional about it.
And invites that in. And I don't think that's nothing to be sneezing at. Let's just
not at all.
Let maybe we can end on that particular note.
Well said. I think that's a great way to end. Well, Jonathan, we appreciate you so much. The time to spend with Gilbert and JD. We're gonna wrap it up here on this podcast today. So thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it so much.
you enjoy the Townsend Institute podcast series, head to our website at cui.edu/Townsend to find out more about the certificates, bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees offered through Concordia University Irvine. With programs in mental health counseling, executive coaching and consulting, and organizational leadership, we have a variety of faith-based programs dedicated to helping you fulfill your academic and professional goals, all the while furthering your competence, character, and connection. Again, that's cui.edu/Townsend.